The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Adlan Fela. I'm the founder of Maravedis, and I welcome you to today's webinar entitled Macro RAN, Small Cells, and Backhaul Trends. Give me a minute to show my screen. So this is the first ever webinar to feature two of the most prominent wireless analysts in the industry on the same event. We appreciate your time. We know how everybody's busy, so we introduced this shorter 30 minutes version instead of the typical full hour webinar. And we're excited because we have a lot of people registered for today's webinar. So let's get started here. So the agenda for today includes a brief housekeeping items followed by a recap of who we are, what we do. I'll then pass it on to Caroline Gabriel, Research Director at Maravedis-Rethink, for an overview of the latest RAN trends and forecasts. We then hear Earl Lum, who's our partner from EJL Wireless, present his views on the RAN and backhaul. And then we will follow up with a short Q&A session. So some housekeeping items here. For those that are not familiar with the GoToWebinar dashboard, you can grab the tab, click the arrow to open and close the panel. You can select which audio format you prefer, whether microphone, speakers, or the telephone, if you have any audio issues. You can submit, and we encourage you to do so, questions throughout the webinar, and we will review those during the event, and hopefully yours will be the one we pick. Some commonly asked questions. Yes, the event is being recorded and will be available for replay within the next 24 hours, along with the slide deck. If you need more information about the reports and research discussed and presented today, you can visit our store at shop.maravedis-pwa.com. So moving on to who we are and what we do. Most of you are pretty familiar with who we are, since we've been in business since 2002, but may be confused about the partnerships and the relationships between each other. So the first thing you need to know is we continue to focus on wireless infrastructure, with the main three areas being the RAN, including small cells and carrier Wi-Fi, backhaul, both point-to-point and point-to-multipoint, as well as increasingly areas of the core network. So since 2012, so 2 years ago, Maravedis and Rethink have entered into a joint venture to combine their resources and better serve our customers. And since the beginning of this year, we're very pleased to have expanded the relationship and the partnership to EJL Wireless, which complements our research offering by adding first-class backhaul research, base station teardowns, antenna market analysis, and much more. The result is we are now 7 full-time employees in different locations presented here. Some of the recent research includes point-to-point radio market analysis and forecast, the microcell base station market analysis and forecast, which were published just less than a month ago, a number of research notes on the RAN, including the pace of NFV, self-organizing networks. We also have very unique research reports that includes the Backhaul regulatory database, which is really the only database in the market that tracks licensing and technical information for backhaul. And some of the unique products we have include, the base station teardowns, which are the only ones in the industry as well. And we also provide research under annual service programs like under Wireless Watch, which is a weekly detailed analysis of developments in the wireless ecosystem. And the RAN service also comes with an annual research service program. So before moving on to Caroline and starting our first presentation, I would like to do a quick poll to understand the areas you're most interested in. So please take a few seconds to respond. And the question being, which areas of the network you're most interested in, between small cells, macro RAN, antennas, cloud RAN, backhaul. Couldn't name all of them because choice is limited by the platform here, but just getting an indication here. I'll give it a few more seconds to for people to respond, and I will be closing the poll. So the poll results, majority of you are interested in backhaul today, 44%, followed by small cells, and then of course cloud RAN. So there's equal level of interest between the backhaul and the RAN. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to first presenter, Caroline Gabriel, Research Director at Maravedis-Rethink. Caroline, I will make you now the presenter.
Thank you. Have you made me presenter?
It's in the process.
Oh.
Takes a few seconds.
Sure.
There you go. We can see your screen.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the webinar today. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes looking at some key trends in the mobile RAN market, which we are getting from our regular surveys of quite a large community of mobile operators. On a quarterly basis, we go out and talk to over 150 operating companies within most of the Tier 1 operator groups. And we're currently just finalising Maravedis-Rethink's major biannual report on most aspects of the mobile RAN. Some of the things I'll share with you now are highlights from that, although the final report, which comes out next month, has extended forecasts through to the end of the decade. But we're noticing a particular focus on two key trends in operator thinking: whether and when to adopt virtualization in the access network, and how to approach densification, horrible word, but big theme for the carriers. Both are important given the kind of graph that you can see on the right of the slide. On the one hand, constantly increasing network capacity investments to keep up with the rise in demand for mobile data, hence the move to more dense networks. Everyone wants density, it's a question of how they're going to achieve that. On the other hand, as you can see in the red curve, the difficulty of generating incremental revenues from that additional capacity. We've seen a string of recent results, Vodafone, China Mobile, others, showing that they're investing massive sums into their 4G networks, but their revenues are not yet getting up. Sorry about that. By our calculations, as seen on this graph, you can see that new revenue only outruns the capex in as late as 2018, and then that's because of more cost-efficient architectures. Hence, that brings us back to virtualization and other platforms such as small cells, which operators hope will bring down the cost and the total cost of ownership of the data platforms that they're deploying. So density is a hot topic for these reasons, at least for post-2015. This isn't something that's happening right now, although we're seeing some very interesting sort of architectural moves out in the market. But so far, LTE rollout has focused mainly on coverage, fairly conventional macro architectures with some urban hotspots, particularly in some of the Asian markets. And we expect that pattern to continue as more operators start to come online with LTE. And these fairly macro-driven traditional approaches, coverage-oriented, will suffice in 2014 to meet the mobile data demand in most markets. After that, however, there starts to be a push to make the networks denser as the traditional approaches, adding more base stations, more sectors and so on, start to become exhausted. But so far in the last year or two, really the main dilemma that operators have been talking about has not been new architectures, but really when they do LTE, whether to go for overlay, an overlay approach, or a single RAN approach where they, like Sprint has done, they strip out and put in a new network. So we're not talking the far future, but we're not talking this year when I start talking about density, but it's something that operators are starting to plan for right now. We saw Qualcomm, Sprint and Airspan, they recently demonstrated a hyperdense network with the equivalent of 1,000 cells per square kilometre. We think that really is something for the distant future, if ever. But by 2020, there'll certainly be operators deploying at a density around half of that. To achieve that kind of level of capacity for selected areas of high demand, a lot of them will be indoors, it's going to need many tools. There isn't really a simple answer, and perhaps the industry has been somewhat guilty in the last couple of years of looking for a silver bullet. It's a common thing to do. It never really happens. The table on the right is to show, really to highlight the large mix of tools and approaches that operators will combine to get what they need in terms of mobile capacity. These are calculations that we did based on a lot of input from the operators and sort of consensus of what they think, but really they're an indicator. You can see that in year one of a capacity-driven project, typically operators are looking to new spectrum, the LTE upgrade itself, and Wi-Fi offload to deliver the majority of that capacity. By the time they get to year 4, it becomes much more about density. Then they're looking for about a quarter of capacity and of reduced total cost of ownership to come from small cells. But even that it's only a quarter. It's not quite enough. Really, they'll be looking for density in several layers of the network once they're getting to this kind of year 4 level. So yes, small cells, but you can also densify the macro layer with techniques like massive MIMO. There are new DAS techniques, particularly indoors, but some of them outdoors. I think we'll hear from Earl a bit about those. And then there's the question of virtualization, potentially changing the economics of building out these vast numbers of cells, which with current technology and pricing just doesn't work. So we start to see Cloud RAN and other approaches to virtualizing the network and putting most of the functions onto standard hardware and servers. All that adds up to a very complex multi-layer HETnet. I can remember a few years ago we talked a lot about operators who might use just one type of technology right through to 2020, small cells only, macrocells only. Really, we're not hearing that anymore. We're hearing that this is a matter of using any spectrum you can get, any type of cell you can get, combining them, and often the return and the capacity that you get will come as much from the decisions that you make about the balance and how you combine these various technologies as the technologies themselves. The graph illustrates that complexity and some of the overall trends that we see going forward over the next few years. The blue line is installed base for small cells, public access, and carrier-managed enterprise small cells. So I think in common with quite a lot of forecasters out there, seeing that the progress is still fairly gradual this year, next year. If there is a hockey stick, it will come in 2016. We don't really think it will be a hockey stick, more of a sort of gradual densification, to use that word again, but getting up to about 7.5 million installed at the end of 2018. And the bars are showing the different technologies in the macro layer. Unsurprisingly, some of the very traditional homogeneous types of cells becoming less important in the mix, and gradually the rise of the two key dense macro technologies, the Cloud RAN, which we mentioned earlier, and the various approaches to super macro, which includes using massive MIMO antennas, carrier aggregation, clever 3D beamforming, and so on to get much, much more out of a macro site. And there are a lot of carriers. EE in the UK has been a particular flag waver for this approach to getting density into your network before you even have to think about a big small cell layer. And I think they said they'll probably wait a couple of years to go to that next phase. So finally, a quick word on what needs to happen to enable this beautiful picture of the beautifully balanced and optimized HETnet with all its layers. Most importantly, top of the list, next generation SON, self-optimizing networks, providing true plug-and-play, true automatic neighbor relations, and SON at every level, at the cell level and up in the cloud as well. We think that's the sine qua non for this to happen. But also next generation interference management and more flexible cells. The P-cell, which was, I'm sure everybody saw, demonstrated recently, is a kind of extreme example of the network creating personal cell around you just for as long as you need it. But there are a lot of technologies that are looking that way so that the network becomes extremely dynamic and responsive and resources allocated just for where you need it and as long as you need it. So again, a little further out, but very important for the next wave of networks. But to bring us back down to earth before I hand back, the graph on the right shows what the carriers at the moment are saying is their number one network priority in rollout if they have to choose just one. And you can see that for the next 3 years, the winner by quite a long way is the navy blue bar, which is simple LTE. It's upgrading LTE using largely conventional approaches and then supplementing them with some of the new architectures that are coming along with a view to moving to a second wave, a kind of HETNet wave, towards the end of the decade. I'm going to pass back to Adeline now. Hope that those were some useful insights.
Thank you, Caroline. It was a very useful presentation. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again during the Q&A. Before I move it and pass it on to Earl, I would like to launch the second poll. And we want to understand, when you buy research, what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve here within your organization? And please take a few seconds to respond. So I'm going to give it a few more seconds for people to respond as you get ready. And I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So the majority of you are buying research to support your strategy. And that's quite clear. And so this is very useful input for us, because as we put together a balance between hard data and qualitative analysis and opinions, educated guesses, all the mix, then we're understanding what the ultimate objective is. Helps us refine our research. I'm going to close the poll, and I want to thank you again for answering the question, and I'm going to make Earl the presenter. Earl, you want to show your screen?
Yes, thank you.
There you go. We can see it. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And I will be talking about, at first, the macrocell RAN trends for 2013 and what happened last year, and then what do we see going forward. So this first slide, if we look at 2013, we had a record year of both base station radio transceiver shipments as well as base stations themselves. Huawei Technologies was the #1 supplier last year on both accounts of both the transceiver market for radio cards shipped as well as for digital baseband units for the actual base stations themselves. 2013 was a significant breakout year for LTE technology. It is the first year for LTE to have achieved over 50% market share of total base stations that were shipped globally in the world. Part of that was being driven primarily from China and the massive rollout of TDD LTE for China Mobile, and also the pre-rollout for China Telecom and for China Unicom for both their TDD and FDD LTE networks. We expect that LTE, while it had a massive growth year in 2013 and continues to be strong this year in 2014, will be somewhat choppy in terms of the volumes shipping through 2016. We expect that the market's going to be strong and continue to be strong in terms of the demand for base station rollouts. Specifically, TDD will be strong through 2015, and then afterwards will start to decline. We expect that the remaining FDD shipments from around the world will continue to be strong through 2016, but the market will certainly take a breather from the current state of where the deployments are today. And so I think that the most important thing to understand and recognize is that there have been some component shortages in the market as we've entered into 2014. We would expect that the supply chain in certain instances will continue to be stressed through 2014 and through parts of 2015. And then as we get into 2016, some of those supply situations are going to ease up as the market pretty much finishes the initial phase of rollouts over in China. So I think the most important thing to understand is that the current state of activity in the market will probably reduce sometime by early 2016 down to more steady state rollouts for the rest of the world. And the supply chain situation should ease up there. In addition to 4G continuing to have its rollout through the rest of this decade, we've also seen indications now of 5G R&D test beds that are happening right now and will continue to ramp through 2018. The most significant indication of these test beds is the frequency bands that we are going to see being utilized for next generation 5G technology. Currently, right now, we have networks that have been launched up in the 2.6 to 2.7 gigahertz frequency bands. And then there is certainly the possibility that the TDD band at 3.5 gigahertz will continue to roll out as WiMAX is converted over to TD-LTE. However, the next generation of technologies that the industry is looking at is starting at 5 gigahertz and going almost all the way to the 77 gigahertz realm. So from an RF component and looking at the ecosystem of supporting very, very high frequency RF networks into the millimeter wave and microwave bands, that is something that the industry will need to address very quickly over the next several years in accessing some of these technologies and making them actually affordable enough to go into commercial production. Going to small cells, there's been certainly, as Caroline had mentioned, a significant amount of activity in small cells. I think one of the most important things to understand and define as the audience looks at research for small cells is certainly to understand the definition of small cells that are being used by the multitude of analysts that are out there. From an EJL wireless perspective, the femtocell market is something that continues to grow, but it's not an area of focus for us. That is typically where you have a residential type of a product that is in the 50 milliwatt or less output power and typically in the 4 to 6 user capacity. Most of the market today is defining small cells from a perspective of starting at the enterprise femtocell level, where again we're looking at output power levels of 100 to 250 milliwatts and typically 16 to 32 users, maybe up to 64 depending on the specific product. And then migrating up to where we believe the majority of the small cells will be deployed will be of the picocell variation, which will be, again, carrier provisioned in the 1 to 2 watts of RF output power and supporting anywhere from 64 to 128 users, and again, could be up to 256 or higher depending on the system and which particular OEM. Both the enterprise and the picocell are indoor primarily. There's certainly an opportunity to put the picocell on the outdoor as well. And then as we transition to the outdoor-only market, then we get into the much higher power 5 to 10 watt microcells and the 256 to 512 users. And most of the situations right now where we're seeing field trials has been in microcells or outdoor. And that is where we've seen a lot of issues with the backhaul of these particular products that we'll get into in a couple of slides. Indoor coverage and capacity has a specific business case decision tree that is being addressed by the industry right now. And I think it's really important to understand different technologies that are going to be used that may be defined as small cells depending on how you view the marketplace. But essentially, in this decision tree, the first thing that the operator has to look at when they're targeting a building to light up is what is the size of that building and what is the type of venue or business that's occupying that building. And typically the size of that building, if it's above 50,000 square feet, will tend to lean towards a potential either single or multi-operator situation, and that will vary by geographical region around the world. If we're looking specifically at North America for this example, then the chances of you going to a single operator if you're above 50,000 square feet is very slim. More than likely, you will be looking at a multi-operator network that will be shared. And if that is the situation, then more than likely the type of network that will be deployed will not be a picocell or enterprise femtocell network that is typically tied to one operator, but it will be more of a distributed antenna system architecture that would be used, again, for a multi-operator solution. If we're looking at the left-hand side of this chart, where we're looking at smaller building sizes, again, from a U.S. perspective, then we would be more than likely to see something in the single operator type of category, and again, using an enterprise femto or picocell solution. It also could be a solution such as the Ericsson DOT or the Huawei Lampsight type of a product. If we were to take a look at this chart with regards to the European landscape, then more than likely, regardless of the building size, you would tend to probably go towards a single operator type of a network where in that particular region you could have more than one system that would be deployed inside of a specific building. So there are vast differences between the deployment strategies of mobile operators in the North American market relative to those over in Europe. Trends that we see right now, for the indoor market, the battleground is essentially between are you going to do DAS or are you actually going to do small cells that are comprised of enterprise femto or picocells. We certainly believe that small cell deployments will continue. They've been ramping up for the past couple of years, but as Caroline said, the hockey stick may happen by 2016, but I think we will continue to see field trials over the next several years for the small cells. With regards to DAS, specifically again in the North American market, the DAS market is extremely strong right now, entering into and going into the middle of 2014. It does not show any signs of slowing down, so there is a significant incumbent activity for in-building DAS today in the North American market, while the small cell market continues to roll out on a more linear basis with regards to both field trials and active deployments. On the outdoor market, initial microcell deployments have been continued to roll out with regards to field trials. We've seen a significant number of very high-profile field trials over in China already regarding microcells from Huawei Technologies and their Atom Cell product. We expect over the next several years that field trials will continue to focus on how do you backhaul outdoor small cells effectively and efficiently. That has been one of the key bottlenecks with regards to actively fielding these particular types of networks and making them actually fit the type of a head-net structure and architecture that the mobile operators are looking for. So one of the most important things that we're seeing right now in the point-to-point radio market for last year and going forward is last year the market took a dip by about 12% in unit volumes from 2012. It still remained above 1 million units in terms of radio shipped, and we are tracking from 5 gigahertz all the way up to 86 gigahertz for E-band, and it also includes the unlicensed bands of 17 gigahertz and also 24 gigahertz. Ericsson managed to just squeak out in retaining its #1 position in the market ahead of Huawei. The most important thing to look at when you're looking at mobile backhaul, or actually the point-to-point radio market, is the fact that mobile continues to comprise 80% of total volumes and shipments within the marketplace. The other 20% is private networks and enterprise, as well as small cells and other applications. Today's microwave radio market and millimeter wave radio market is all about capacity. Anything that is below 1 gigabit right now is going to start transitioning over into the 1 gigabit and multi-gigabit types of radio products. We expect that within the next 3 to 5 years, the market will see 5 gigabit radio links trending towards a 10 gigabit radio link capacity. We also expect that small cells will have a positive impact. However, the most significant issue with small cells right now is how do you backhaul them, and are you using non-line of sight? Are you using line of sight 60 gigahertz? Are you using line of sight 70, 80 gigahertz for E-band or some other technology? And one of the most critical issues that the industry is facing right now is the ability to offset pole sway when you've used the microwave radios to backhaul some of these small cells, as opposed to the traditional large macro cell market that is mounted either on a tower or on a rooftop. We expect that shipments are going to remain range-bound over the next 5 years, so we are not expecting a hockey stick. We would expect that the market will be up and down, but again, within a certain range of several 100,000 radios plus or minus from where we were in 2013. And with that, I will hand the presentation back over to Adlan.
Thank you, thank you for this great presentation. Let me show my screen again here. Before we finish the event today and answer some questions, would like to give a few words about the Small Cell World Summit, where we are a knowledge partner. This will take place in London on June 10 to 12. And if you are interested in meeting Caroline Gabriel, she will be presenting and chairing at this event. I would like also to make a special promotion for the reports that were presented today. So we have a 10% off on all the orders valid until June 10. And so you can use the webinar promo code when you check out from the shop.maravedis-bw.com website store. So all the reports are available at a 10% discount if you use this webinar promo code. And if you need more information about the research or services, you can contact me at any of the contact details presented here. Now, I would like to maybe address a couple of questions. I know we promised to deliver this webinar within 30 minutes. We're a little bit over time here. But a question to both Caroline and do you think that small cells will live up to their promise, and when? There's been a lot of speculation and talk about overinflated forecast, and what's your take on that?
Shall I go first?
Yes, please.
I think, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the industry is going through one of those inevitable phases that we always do, where there's a huge amount of hopes put onto a certain technology. Then people realise that actually it's quite a difficult technology and it's not necessarily a silver bullet, and that's often taken as perhaps too strongly, as the technology hasn't lived up to its promise. So I think there's a really important role for small cells. I think the carrier's vision, it was overhyped, as these things always are, but it was also, I think the carrier's vision for small cells has changed. I think they've loaded a lot more of their expectations onto this architecture, which started as something that was going to solve relatively simple problems. Now they are looking for much more dense networks. They're talking about HETnets. They want, really, these are full-scale base stations, these things, and as Earl noted, there are lots of bottlenecks, including backhaul. So, and the more complicated they've become, the harder it is to make the economics work, because these are not going to be $100 devices. So I think the goalposts have constantly changed. I think there will be a point at which everything comes together and the small cells find their right place and the right level of cost and technology that they will deliver. And I think the definition of what a small cell is probably changing anyway. I think we are going to start thinking about small cells of coverage as opposed to small base stations, and the unit delivering that coverage may be far more varied than was originally envisaged when we started the conversation a few years ago.
Okay. Do you want to complement the answer and maybe touch on carrier Wi-Fi as well?
Sure, Adlan. I think one of the situations that the market is looking at is again, like Caroline was saying, we've had some disappointment out there in the marketplace. Certainly from our perspective at EJL Wireless, the outdoor market now is looking to be very much a surgical solution where you're not expecting to have blanket coverage, and you will place the small cells or Wi-Fi hotspots to alleviate capacity or to add coverage where you are seeing certain issues that are happening within your network. And I think the most important thing to understand right now with small cells is that the majority of small cells, whether they're indoor or outdoor, that are being deployed today in the marketplace is not for capacity. They are being deployed by operators for coverage problems. So we are on one end of a spectrum that's migrating from a capacity situation over to coverage over the next several years. And I certainly believe that the market is certainly looking to be a lot slower in development, like I was hinting at, because of outdoor situations with backhaul. And I think on the indoor side, it's going to be hampered by regional situations that, like in the U.S., where you will have an extensive ecosystem for DAS that will probably likely win out over a OEM type of a small cell solution.
Okay, great. I'm sure we could spend probably the rest of the day discussing small cells and backhaul, but I'm afraid this is the end of the webinar. We promised to make it short and sweet. I hope you liked the webinar. I want to thank our media partner, the Mobile Network, for their fantastic promotion of the webinar. And I want to thank our guest speakers today and all of you for attending this webinar. Thank you very much.